Claire slid the divorce papers beneath Daniel's retirement watch, while 80 people were still applauding him. The ballroom of the Harbor Ridge Country Club glowed beneath amber chandeliers, their light catching on champagne flutes and polished silverware, while the last notes of an old Sinatra song drifted from the speakers near the dance floor. Daniel Mercer had just sat down after 34 years with Halston Engineering, his navy suit jacket warm across his shoulders from handshakes and embraces, when he noticed the cream-colored envelope beside his plate. His name was typed across the front. Not Dan. Not Honey. Daniel Mercer. Claire sat 3 feet away in a pale blue dress, one hand resting beside an untouched glass of Chardonnay. "Open it," she said. Around them, forks scraped porcelain. Someone at the next table laughed too loudly at a joke. Daniel glanced at his wife, then slipped one finger beneath the envelope flap. The paper inside was thick and cool. He saw the county heading first, then petition for dissolution of marriage. His thumb stopped halfway down the page. 32 years of marriage reduced to black letters beneath the yellow ballroom light. Claire. His voice barely carried beyond their table. She straightened her napkin with 2 fingers. "I thought tonight was the right time." Daniel looked toward the small stage. His retirement photograph was still projected behind the podium. 27-year-old Daniel in a hard hat beside the company's first municipal bridge project. Someone had placed a sheet cake beneath it with "Congratulations, Dan," written in blue frosting. "The right time?" he asked. Claire's bracelet clicked softly against the table. "The kids are here. Your friends are here. You're retiring. Everything is changing anyway." Their daughter Emily had gone still across the table. Their son Michael lowered his water glass without drinking. Daniel heard the ice settle against the glass with a brittle clink. Claire leaned closer, carrying the faint scent of the jasmine perfume she had worn for years. "I don't want a scene." Daniel stared at her for 1 second longer. Then another. A waiter passed behind him carrying prime rib, filling the air with rosemary and roasted garlic. Daniel folded the papers carefully along their original crease. He returned them to the envelope. Claire watched his hands. She knew those hands. They had repaired broken cabinet hinges at midnight, signed tuition checks, held hers through 2 deliveries, packed lunches before dawn when her mother was sick. Tonight, she seemed to be waiting for those hands to shake. They didn't. The MC tapped the microphone. "Dan, before everybody disappears, I think you still owe us that retirement toast." A few people applauded. Daniel pushed back his chair. Claire caught his sleeve. "Daniel, we need to talk about this." He looked down at her fingers until she released him. "We will." He picked up the retirement watch his co-workers had given him, fastened the cool steel band around his wrist, and walked toward the stage with the divorce envelope still in his other hand. The room softened into silence as he reached the microphone. Claire remained at the table, her shoulders rigid now. Daniel placed the envelope face down beside the podium. 34 years, he began. His voice came through the speakers steady and low. "You spend that much time building things, you learn something. Plans change. Structures fail. And sometimes you discover the future you thought you were building isn't the one waiting for you." Claire's chin lifted sharply. Daniel never looked at her. He thanked his team. He thanked the younger engineers who had challenged him. He thanked his children for forgiving all the late dinners and missed Saturdays. He even thanked the people in the room who had taught him when to hold on and when to stop carrying something that no longer belonged to him. Then he raised his champagne glass. "To retirement," he said, "and to finding out what comes next." The room erupted in applause. Daniel drank once, set down the glass, and returned to his seat. Claire whispered, "You're not going to say anything?" Daniel slipped the envelope inside his jacket. "Not tonight. I need you to sign those papers." For the first time, he turned fully toward her. Behind Claire, the projector changed slides, washing her face in cold blue light. "I know what you need," Daniel said quietly. Then he looked at the watch on his wrist, and something in his expression made Claire's hand tighten around her napkin. "Tomorrow," he said, "we find out what I need." By the time Daniel unlocked their front door, Claire had already carried 2 suitcases down from the bedroom. Their wheels stood on the hardwood beside the staircase, black and upright beneath the soft glow of the foyer lamp. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and the lilies Claire had arranged that morning, but the silence inside felt nothing like the ballroom they had left 20 minutes earlier. No applause, no silverware, only the low hum of the refrigerator and the metallic click of Daniel setting his keys in the ceramic bowl. Claire walked past him without removing her coat. I'm staying at a hotel tonight. Daniel closed the door and loosened his tie. The cream envelope remained inside his jacket, pressing against his chest whenever he moved. How long have those been packed? Claire stopped at the bottom stair. Does that matter? Daniel looked at the suitcases again. A luggage tag from their anniversary trip to Charleston still hung from one handle, its leather edges worn smooth. He remembered kneeling beside that same case 3 years earlier, forcing the zipper shut while Claire laughed because she had packed 4 pairs of shoes for a 5-day trip. Now both cases were zipped perfectly. Waiting. It matters to me, he said. Claire exhaled through her nose. A few days. She started upstairs. Daniel followed, not quickly, his shoes making dull sounds against each wooden step. In their bedroom, the bedside lamp cast a warm circle over Claire's half of the mattress. Her closet door stood open. Empty hangers clicked against one another beneath the air vent. Daniel reached inside and pushed them aside. Nearly half her clothes were gone. The blue robe that had hung behind the door for years was gone too. On the dresser, their framed wedding photograph remained exactly where it had always been. Daniel at 29 in a rented tuxedo, Claire holding white roses against his shoulder. He picked it up, wiped a thin line of dust from the glass with his thumb, then set it face down. Claire watched from the doorway. Don't make this dramatic. Daniel crossed to the small desk near the window. Their retirement binder lay beneath a stack of travel brochures. Yellowstone, Vancouver, a rail trip through New England they had discussed taking in October. He opened it. Hotel confirmations. Insurance notes. A handwritten list in Claire's looping script. Places to see after Dan retires. Daniel removed the airline itinerary they had booked for 6 weeks from now. 2 seats. He folded it once and slipped it into the binder pocket. Were you planning to tell me before the trip? Claire's lips parted, but no answer came. The heating system clicked on, pushing dry, warm air through the room. Somewhere outside, a car crossed wet pavement with a long hiss. Daniel closed the binder. How long, Claire? She rubbed her thumb over the edge of her wedding ring. I decided months ago. Daniel's eyes moved from her ring to the empty closet. Months. I wanted you to get through your last year at work. So you waited for my retirement dinner. I thought it would be cleaner. A small sound escaped Daniel, not quite a laugh. He walked into the bathroom and opened the cabinet beneath the sink. Her travel cosmetics were missing. Her prescription bottles were gone. Even the silver toiletry case he had bought her for Christmas was no longer there. This wasn't a woman leaving after an argument. She had been subtracting herself from the house piece by piece while he counted down the days until they could finally have mornings together. Daniel returned to the bedroom and took the cream envelope from his jacket. Claire's eyes followed it immediately. You can sign tonight, she said. There's a pen downstairs. Daniel held the envelope for a moment, then placed it inside the retirement binder and closed the cover over it. He carried the binder to the small fireproof cabinet in his study, turned the steel key, and locked it inside. When he came back, Claire was standing beside her suitcases. What are you doing? Daniel lifted one suitcase by its side handle and carried it to the front porch. Cold night air slipped through the doorway, carrying the smell of damp grass. He returned for the second case and placed it beside the first. Then he stepped back into the house. Claire stared at him across the threshold. Daniel removed his wedding ring, set it quietly in the ceramic bowl beside his keys, and met her eyes. You planned your exit, he said. Now I'm going to plan mine. At 7:12 the next morning, Claire came back expecting Daniel's signature and found a lawyer's number on the kitchen table instead. Pale winter light cut through the blinds in narrow stripes, falling across the ceramic bowl where Daniel's wedding ring still rested beside his keys. The coffee maker hissed behind him, filling the kitchen with the dark smell of French roast, while Claire closed the front door and stood there in yesterday's blue dress beneath a camel-colored coat. I thought you'd call, she said. Daniel poured coffee into one mug. I was sleeping. Her eyes moved to the table. A yellow legal pad sat beside his reading glasses. At the top, Daniel had written 3 words in block letters. Divorce, attorney, accounts. Claire pulled out a chair, its wooden legs scraping sharply across the tile. Daniel, we don't need to turn this into a war. I agree. He carried his coffee to the table, but remained standing. Claire opened her handbag and removed a black pen. She placed it between them. Then sign. Daniel looked at the pen. For 32 years, Claire had known exactly how he handled conflict. He fixed it. When contractors missed deadlines, he called them. When tuition bills arrived, he paid them. When holidays became complicated, he rearranged his schedule until everyone else could breathe. Claire tapped one fingernail against the pen. The terms are reasonable. Maybe they are. You haven't even read them? I read enough last night to know I shouldn't read the rest without counsel. The tapping stopped. Daniel sat down and turned the legal pad toward himself. From now on, anything involving the divorce goes through attorneys. Claire stared at him. The refrigerator compressor clicked off, leaving the kitchen so quiet Daniel could hear the second hand moving inside the wall clock. Attorneys? She repeated. Yes. After 32 years, you need a stranger sitting between us? Daniel lifted the mug. Steam touched his glasses. He removed them and wiped the lenses slowly with the edge of his shirt. You put a legal document beside my retirement watch in front of 80 people. You already put strangers between us. Claire pushed back from the table. I was trying to avoid months of fighting. Then don't fight. Daniel stood, crossed into the study, and unlocked the fireproof cabinet. The steel door gave a heavy metallic click. He removed the cream envelope but did not open it. Instead, he slid it into a larger document folder with their tax returns, retirement statements, mortgage records, and insurance policies. Claire appeared in the doorway. What are you doing with those? Getting organized. Those are our records. Exactly. Daniel closed the folder and placed it inside a canvas briefcase he had carried to Halston Engineering for almost 20 years. Yesterday, he had thought he would never need it again. Claire folded her arms. I have appointments today. I can't keep coming back here because you've decided to make this complicated. Daniel buckled the briefcase. You don't have to come back for the paperwork. Then when will you sign? He checked the retirement watch on his wrist. 7:26. When my attorney tells me I understand what I'm signing. Claire's jaw tightened. I need this handled quickly. Daniel paused with his hand on the study lamp. There it was again. Not sadness. Not explanation. Speed. He didn't ask why. Not yet. Instead, he switched off the lamp, leaving the room washed in cold gray daylight, and walked past her toward the front door. Claire followed. Daniel. He slipped into his overcoat. What? You're really doing this? Daniel looked at the woman who had planned her departure for months and expected him to complete it overnight. Then he took his wedding ring from the ceramic bowl and placed it in the briefcase beside the divorce papers, not back on his finger. Yes. He opened the door. Cold air rushed across the hardwood, carrying the wet smell of last night's rain. I spent 34 years checking every load calculation before I put my name on it. I'm not going to become careless on my first morning of retirement. Claire stepped toward him. I want an answer by Friday. Daniel met her eyes, then pulled the door shut behind him. You'll get one from my attorney. Evelyn Shaw placed Claire's proposed settlement beside Daniel's retirement statement and circled one sentence in red. Her office smelled of fresh coffee and old leather, with morning sunlight reflecting off the glass towers across downtown and the muted hiss of traffic 12 floors below. Daniel sat opposite her in the same navy suit he had worn to work hundreds of times, his canvas briefcase resting against his shoe. The retirement watch showed 9:18. Your wife isn't asking for anything outrageous on its face, Evelyn said. She turned the settlement toward him. Half the marital equity. An agreed division of retirement assets. Standard language on personal property. Daniel ran one finger along the paper's rough edge. Then why does she need it done by Friday? Evelyn tapped the paragraph she had marked. Because this section asks you to cooperate with an accelerated buyout of her interest in the house, and this one allows certain liquid assets to be distributed as soon as an agreement is signed, rather than waiting for the normal process. Daniel looked through the window. A delivery truck crawled between yellow taxis far below. How much? Potentially several $100,000, depending on valuation and what you voluntarily agree to release. The number hung between them. Evelyn reached for another document. There's also something you need to understand. Until we have complete financial disclosure, you don't move money, refinance the house, change beneficiaries, hide assets, or play games with joint property. Neither does Claire. We keep everything clean. Daniel nodded once. Clean is fine. Good. She slid a representation agreement toward him. Then let me do my job. Daniel took out his pen. For 34 years at Halston Engineering, he had signed drawings only after every column, load, and tolerance had been checked. He read every page now. Claire had counted on speed. Daniel chose procedure. His pen scratched across the final signature line. Evelyn immediately turned to her computer. The keyboard clicked rapidly beneath her fingers. I'm notifying Claire's attorney that you're represented. I'm requesting full financial disclosure, and I'm stating that you will not consent to any accelerated distribution or home equity transaction before review. Daniel fastened his pen inside the briefcase. Send it. By noon, he was back home. The kitchen felt cooler than it had that morning, and the coffee in the pot had turned bitter enough to smell burnt. Daniel opened the cabinet where they kept household files and carried 3 thick folders to the dining table. Mortgage statements, retirement accounts, joint banking records. He did not search Claire's drawers. He did not open her private mail. He simply gathered what already belonged to both of them and began making copies for Evelyn. The printer hummed in the study. Paper slid into the tray, warm beneath his fingertips. At 12:43, Claire called. Daniel let it ring twice before answering. My attorney just contacted me, she said. Her voice was clipped, each word precise. You told them not to release anything. I told my attorney to review everything. The settlement already tells you what I'm asking for. Then the review should be easy. Silence. Daniel could hear a hotel elevator chime faintly through her phone. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Daniel placed another mortgage statement on the scanner. A white bar of light traveled slowly beneath the glass. No, I'm making it slower than you wanted it to be. Claire's breathing changed. There's a difference? Apparently. Daniel, I need access to my share quickly. He stopped with his hand above the scanner lid. Not our divorce. Not closure. Access. Your attorney can explain the process, he said. Don't do that. Do what? Talk to me like I'm a client. Daniel looked toward the ceramic bowl in the foyer. Only his keys remained there now. His wedding ring was locked inside the briefcase with the divorce papers. You stopped talking to me like a husband before you served me in that ballroom. Claire said nothing. Daniel closed the scanner lid and pressed start. The machine whirred between them. I'm entitled to my half, she finally said. And I'm not stopping you from receiving $1 you're legally entitled to. His voice stayed level. But I'm not advancing money, refinancing this house, or signing away anything early just because you chose Friday as your deadline. Another elevator chime sounded on her end, followed by footsteps. Then Claire lowered her voice. You don't understand. Friday matters. Daniel watched the scan page appear on his computer screen. Then tell your attorney why. He ended the call, placed the phone face down, and sent the final batch of records to Evelyn. 30 seconds later, Claire called again. Daniel did not answer. For the first time since she placed those papers beside his retirement watch, the clock was no longer running on Claire's schedule. Claire was waiting in Daniel's driveway Thursday afternoon, and the man beside her was wearing a watch worth more than Daniel's first car. A black Range Rover idled at the curb, its engine giving off a low mechanical purr while cold sunlight flashed across the windshield. Daniel stopped halfway up the walk with a grocery bag tucked beneath one arm. Claire stepped toward him, her heels clicking against the concrete. The man remained near the vehicle in a charcoal overcoat, one hand inside his pocket. We need to talk, Claire said. Daniel unlocked the front door. Your attorney has Evelyn's number. Not about the paperwork. That made him stop. Wind moved through the bare maple branches above them, carrying the smell of chimney smoke from somewhere down the block. Daniel looked at the stranger. Claire followed his eyes. This is Richard Vale. Richard extended a hand. Daniel. Daniel shifted the grocery bag and shook it once. Richard's palm was warm, his grip practiced. Richard. Inside, Daniel set the groceries on the kitchen counter. The paper bag crackled as a carton of eggs settled against a jar of pasta sauce. Claire remained standing. Richard took the chair Daniel had occupied the morning after the retirement dinner. I'd rather you heard this from me, Claire said. Daniel opened the refrigerator and put away the milk. Then say it. Claire glanced at Richard. We're together. Daniel's hand stayed on the refrigerator door for half a second before he closed it. The rubber seal whispered shut. Richard lowered his eyes toward the table. Claire continued. It started several months ago. Daniel took the remaining groceries from the bag one item at a time. Coffee, bread, apples. He placed each where it belonged. Before you decided to divorce me. Yes. The wall clock ticked above the sink. Daniel folded the empty grocery bag along its creases. And Friday, Claire pulled out the chair opposite Richard. Richard is involved in a redevelopment project downtown. There's an investment group closing its funding round tomorrow. Richard leaned forward. Claire has an opportunity to participate. It's time-sensitive. Daniel looked from him to Claire. With what money? Claire's fingers tightened around the strap of her handbag. My share of the marital assets. Your eventual share. Which is why I asked you to cooperate. Daniel finally understood the shape of her urgency, and it was simpler than any conspiracy he could have imagined. Claire had built a new future before ending the old one, and she had assumed Daniel would help finance the transition because helping Claire was what Daniel had always done. Richard opened a slim leather folder. There may be a practical solution. If you consent to an expedited home equity buyout and partial distribution, Claire can meet the commitment tomorrow. Your attorneys can reconcile everything in the final settlement. He slid a sheet across the table. Daniel did not touch it. You came into my house to ask me to advance money so my wife can invest with the man she left me for? Richard's mouth tightened. I wouldn't characterize it that way. I would, Daniel said. Claire stood abruptly. Her chair scraped across the tile. This isn't about him. It's my money. Daniel turned toward her. Then why do you need my signature? The refrigerator hummed behind them. Richard looked at his watch. Claire's cheeks had gone pale beneath the kitchen's warm pendant lights. Because the funds aren't liquid yet, she said. And the commitment expires tomorrow at 5. Daniel walked to the counter, picked up his phone, and called Evelyn. Claire stared at him as the line rang. Daniel, what are you doing? Evelyn answered. Daniel never looked away from Claire. Evelyn, it's Daniel Mercer. I need you to send something to Claire's attorney today. Claire took one step closer. What? Daniel spoke into the phone. Tell them I'm prepared to negotiate a fair division immediately. Every dollar Claire is legally entitled to, she gets. But there will be no advance distribution, no emergency refinancing, and no voluntary release of marital funds before the agreement is complete. Richard rose from his chair. That effectively kills the investment. Daniel ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. Then he opened the front door. Cold air swept into the kitchen and lifted the corner of Richard's and signed proposal. No, Daniel said. It means Claire's new life starts with Claire paying for it. By Friday morning, Daniel had canceled the retirement trip Claire once believed he would beg her to take with him. The airline representative's voice murmured through his phone while pale sunlight spread across the dining table, touching the glossy Vancouver brochure and the rail itinerary they had planned for October. Outside, a garbage truck groaned down the street. Inside, fresh coffee and printer-warm paper scented the quiet house. Both tickets? The representative asked. Daniel looked at Claire's empty chair. Both. A keyboard clicked through the speaker. Your refund will return to the original payment method. Thank you. Daniel ended the call, drew a black line through the itinerary, and placed it beside 2 other cancellations. The resort deposit in Arizona and the reservation for a new luxury SUV he had planned to buy after retirement. He had spent years imagining freedom as something Claire and he would purchase together. Now he was stripping that future down to what belonged to him alone. At 10:06, Evelyn called. Claire's attorney accepted mediation this afternoon. Daniel closed the retirement binder. Good. There's one complication. They're still requesting an immediate advance against her expected settlement. No. I assumed that was your answer. I'll give her everything the law says is hers. Daniel ran his thumb over the cool steel band of his retirement watch. I won't give her tomorrow's money today because Richard has a deadline. At 3, Daniel entered a conference room at Evelyn's office. Fluorescent light reflected across the polished walnut table, and the air conditioning blew cold enough that Claire kept her coat around her shoulders. She sat opposite him with her attorney. Richard was absent. A glass pitcher of water stood between them, untouched. Claire slid a revised proposal across the table. This gets us finished faster. Daniel read it. The division was cleaner now. The numbers were closer to what Evelyn had calculated. But the same request remained near the bottom, immediate partial distribution upon execution. Daniel uncapped his pen. Claire's eyes fixed on it. If the final numbers are fair, Daniel said, I'm prepared to settle. Claire leaned forward. Today. The divorce, yes. Her shoulders dropped slightly. Then Daniel drew one clean line through the accelerated distribution clause. The pen made a dry scratching sound against the paper. Claire's shoulders rose again. Daniel. He initialed the change. That part, no. You know what that does. Yes. Richard's funding closes at 5. Daniel checked his watch. 3:41. Then you have an hour and 19 minutes. Claire stared across the table. You're enjoying this. Daniel capped the pen. If I wanted revenge, I'd drag this out. I'm doing the opposite. He pushed the proposal toward her. I'm giving you the divorce you asked for. Claire's attorney quietly lifted the document and examined the revision. Daniel continued. You'll receive your fair share through the legal process. I won't hide money. I won't punish you financially. I won't interfere with whatever you build after this. Claire's fingers tightened around her water glass. But you won't help me. Daniel looked at her hand. At the wedding ring she still wore despite the packed suitcases and Richard Vale. Not anymore. The room went still except for the ventilation humming overhead. Claire released the glass. After everything we've been through, you can just switch that off? Daniel reached into his briefcase and removed the retirement binder. He opened it to the canceled airline itinerary and turned it toward her. Then the Arizona reservation. Then the SUV deposit. I spent 34 years preparing to retire into a life built around us, he said. That life ended when you put those papers beside my watch. Claire stared at the crossed-out reservations. Daniel closed the binder. So I canceled it. Her eyes lifted. All of it. All of it. He placed the settlement beside her hand. I'm not fighting to keep you, Claire. I'm not financing Richard. And I'm not spending retirement waiting for you to change your mind. Claire glanced toward the clock on the wall. 3:47. Her phone vibrated against the table. Richard's name illuminated the screen. She silenced it. It vibrated again. Daniel stood, buttoned his jacket, and placed his pen inside the briefcase. You wanted a different life, he said. Sign the fair settlement, and you can have one. Claire looked at the document, then at the clock, then at Richard's name flashing for a third time. Daniel walked to the door. Behind him, Claire finally called his name. He stopped without turning. If I sign without the advance, she said, Richard walks. Daniel rested one hand on the brass door handle. Then today you get to find out whether he wanted you, he said, or what you thought I would give you. At 4:12, Richard Vale walked into the mediation room without knocking. The glass door struck its stopper with a hard click, and cold hallway air followed him inside, carrying the sharp scent of rain from his wool overcoat. Claire looked up from the settlement. Daniel remained beside the door, one hand resting on his canvas briefcase, while Evelyn and Claire's attorney exchanged a glance across the walnut table. Richard checked his phone before he looked at anyone. We have 48 minutes. Claire stood. Richard, this is a legal meeting. And at 5 o'clock, the subscription window closes. His voice was polished but thinner than it had been in Daniel's kitchen. He placed his phone on the table. Its screen glowed beside Claire's and signed settlement. If the funds aren't confirmed by then, the allocation goes to another investor. Claire turned toward Daniel. You heard him. Daniel returned to his chair. The leather cushion gave a quiet sigh beneath his weight. I heard him yesterday. Richard pulled out the chair beside Claire. Mr. Mercer, nobody is asking you to give Claire anything that won't ultimately belong to her. Evelyn folded her hands. That is precisely what you're asking. You want Mr. Mercer to assume additional risk and accelerate a distribution before the settlement is completed. Richard barely looked at her. This can be solved with one signature. Daniel opened the revised agreement. The fluorescent lights reflected against the steel retirement watch on his wrist. Then let's solve the divorce. Claire stared at him. Daniel, please. It was the first time she had used that word since the dinner. Daniel read the settlement from the first page to the last. The house would be valued and either sold or bought out under agreed terms. Retirement accounts would be divided according to the final order. Joint cash would be distributed fairly. Personal property would be handled separately. No punishment. No hidden trap. No emergency advance. He placed the document flat. Evelyn, are these terms fair? Yes. To Claire too. Evelyn nodded. Yes. Daniel uncapped his pen. Richard leaned forward. Claire stopped breathing long enough for Daniel to hear the air conditioning rattle above them. Daniel signed the agreement. His pen moved steadily across each marked line. Then he slid the pages toward Claire. For half a second, her face loosened. Richard picked up his phone. Good. Now execute the authorization for the advance. Daniel capped his pen. No, Richard's thumb stopped above the screen. Claire's relief vanished. Daniel, the divorce terms are signed. He pushed the separate funding authorization back across the table untouched. That document isn't part of them. Richard looked toward Claire's attorney. We discussed this. The attorney adjusted his glasses. Mr. Mercer never agreed to it. We're talking about money Claire will receive anyway. Daniel stood. Later. Richard's voice hardened. You're willing to destroy a significant opportunity over timing? Daniel slipped his pen into the briefcase. It isn't my opportunity. Claire rose so quickly her water glass trembled. You know I can't replace that amount in 40 minutes. Daniel met her across the table. Then don't invest. You don't get to decide that. Exactly. The word landed quietly. Daniel lifted the signed settlement. That's what you still don't understand. I'm not deciding what you do anymore. Richard checked his phone. For 26. Claire, we need an answer. She turned on him. I told you Daniel would cooperate. Richard's jaw tightened. And I told you the commitment depended on available capital. The room changed with that sentence. Claire stared at him. Daniel did not move. He had spent 32 years stepping into every uncomfortable silence before Claire had to stand inside it. This time he let it remain. At 4:31, Richard picked up his coat. Call me when you have confirmed funds. Claire blinked. You're leaving? I have other investors to speak with. He was already at the glass door. Claire followed him 2 steps. Richard, you said we were doing this together. He turned, but his eyes dropped first to the unsigned funding authorization. I said we had an opportunity. Then he left. His footsteps faded along the hallway. Claire stood beneath the white fluorescent light with her phone in one hand and the divorce settlement in the other. Daniel closed his briefcase. She turned toward him. You knew this would happen. Daniel shook his head. No, the wall clock clicked to 4:33. I just stopped making sure it wouldn't. At 4:52, Claire's phone rang again, and this time Richard did not ask whether she was coming. The mediation room had emptied except for Daniel, Claire, and their attorneys, while late afternoon sunlight burned orange against the windows and the ventilation system pushed cold, dry air across the table. Claire answered with the phone pressed tightly to her ear. Daniel could hear Richard's voice, low and clipped, but not the words. I can have the money after the settlement is processed, Claire said. A pause. Her fingers curled against the edge of the walnut table. Richard, that could be days, not months. Another pause. You said this wasn't only about the investment. Daniel lowered his eyes to the signed agreement in front of him. He did not need to hear Richard's answer. Claire did. Her hand slowly fell from her ear. Fine, she whispered. The call ended. The screen went black. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Claire picked up her pen and signed the settlement where her attorney indicated. One signature, then another. The scratch of the ballpoint sounded unnaturally loud in the chilled room. At 4:57, her attorney gathered the completed pages. We'll submit everything through the normal process. Claire nodded without looking at him. Her phone remained dark beside her hand. At exactly 5, it vibrated once. She looked down. A message appeared. Daniel could not read it from across the table, but he watched Claire's thumb hover above the screen before she turned the phone face down. Evelyn closed her folder. That concludes what we can accomplish today. Daniel stood and buttoned his jacket. Claire remained seated. Daniel. He stopped. Her attorney and Evelyn quietly moved into the hallway, leaving the glass door partly open. Beyond it came the muted ding of an elevator and the smell of burnt coffee from the reception area. Claire stared at the empty chair Richard had occupied 20 minutes earlier. He gave the position to another investor. Daniel said nothing, and he says we should take some time apart. Her voice caught on the final word, but Daniel did not cross the room. Claire rubbed the pale indentation beneath her wedding ring. 32 years, she said. And you could have prevented this with one signature. Daniel looked at the signed divorce settlement between them. I prevented plenty of things for 32 years. Claire raised her eyes. So this was punishment? No. Daniel reached into his canvas briefcase and removed the cream envelope she had placed beside his retirement watch. He laid it gently in front of her. The paper was no longer crisp. One corner had softened from being carried between home, Evelyn's office, and mediation. Punishment would have been refusing to let you go. Claire looked down at the envelope. Daniel continued. You asked for a divorce. I agreed. You asked for your fair share. I agreed to that too. The only thing I stopped doing was solving the consequences for you. Claire's lips parted, but no answer came. Daniel opened his briefcase again and removed his wedding ring. For a moment, the gold band rested in his palm beneath the orange window light. Then he placed it on top of the envelope. A tiny metallic tap broke the silence. Claire stared at it. What am I supposed to do now? She asked. Daniel lifted the retirement binder from his briefcase. Inside were the crossed-out reservations for Vancouver, Arizona, and the SUV he no longer wanted. He tore the canceled itinerary cleanly in half, then again, and dropped the pieces into the recycling bin beside the conference table. The same thing I'm doing. Claire watched him. What's that? Daniel closed the binder. Build a life that doesn't depend on the other person. He turned toward the door. Claire stood. Daniel, wait. He stopped beneath the fluorescent light. If Richard is gone, if this isn't what I thought it would be, she could not finish. Daniel looked back at her, at the woman who had expected him to beg at his retirement dinner, expected him to sign on command, expected his money to carry her safely into another man's future. Then you still have exactly what you asked me for, he said. Claire's eyes dropped to the divorce papers. Daniel stepped into the hallway and pressed the elevator button. Behind him, she called his name once more. The doors opened with a soft chime. Daniel walked inside. Claire stayed where she was. And for the first time in 32 years, when her plans fell apart, Daniel did not turn around to fix them. 1 year later, Daniel wore the retirement watch because it finally measured time that belonged only to him. Morning light spilled across the deck of a small rented cabin outside Asheville, turning the Blue Ridge Mountains silver beyond the railing, while coffee steamed in his hands and cicadas buzzed beneath the warm June air. His phone rested face down on the cedar table. No work emails waited for him. No itinerary had been arranged around Claire. He had spent the year learning the strange luxury of ordinary choices, driving west for a week because he felt like it, volunteering twice a month with a community engineering program, cooking dinner with Emily and Michael without checking his watch, leaving an afternoon completely empty simply because he could. The divorce had been finalized cleanly. Claire received her fair share of the marital assets. Daniel kept his. The house had been sold, and neither of them had fought over furniture that belonged more to memory than to either person. Richard never returned after his investment deadline collapsed. Daniel had never contacted him, investigated him, or needed to. Claire had learned what Richard's silence meant without Daniel explaining it for her. That evening, Daniel met Claire at Emily's house for their granddaughter's birthday dinner. The backyard smelled of grilled corn and charcoal, and paper lanterns swayed above the patio, while children chased soap bubbles through the grass. Claire arrived alone. Her hair was shorter now. She carried a wrapped gift beneath one arm and paused when she saw Daniel laughing beside the grill. You look different, she said later, when the plates had been cleared and the family moved inside for cake. Daniel glanced down at his linen shirt. Less neckties. Claire almost smiled. They sat at opposite ends of a wooden bench beneath the porch light. Through the screen door came the clatter of dishes and their granddaughter's laughter. Claire rubbed one thumb along the condensation on her water glass. I owe you an apology. Daniel waited. Not because Richard left. She looked toward the dark lawn. Because I thought I knew exactly what you would do. Daniel rested his forearms on his knees. Claire continued. I thought you'd argue. Then I thought you'd beg me to reconsider. And when you didn't, she swallowed. I still assumed you'd make everything easy for me. The money, the house, the deadline, all of it. A moth struck the porch light with a soft tap. Daniel looked at his watch. Claire noticed. You still wear it. Every day. I remember putting those papers beside it. Daniel nodded. So do I. Claire lowered her glass. What changed that night? Daniel looked through the screen door at Emily carrying a birthday cake across the kitchen while Michael switched off the lights. 32 years had not disappeared. They had become photographs, adult children, shared holidays, mistakes neither person could erase. But they no longer required Daniel to keep playing the same role. Nothing changed that night, he said. I did. Claire studied him. Daniel touched the steel band around his wrist. For years, I thought loving you meant making sure you never had to carry the hard parts alone. Somewhere along the way, I started carrying things that were yours. Claire's eyes dropped to her hands. And when I asked for the divorce? You made a choice. Daniel stood as voices inside began singing happy birthday. For once, I let you own it. Claire rose too. Did you ever want me to come back? Daniel considered the question. Then he opened the screen door, and warm vanilla from the birthday cake drifted onto the porch. At first, I wanted the life I thought we had. He looked at her. That isn't the same thing. Claire nodded slowly. No argument followed. No request. They walked inside together and stood on opposite sides of their family while their granddaughter blew out 7 candles. Later, Daniel stepped into the summer night, keys in one hand, retirement watch catching the porch light. Claire remained by the doorway. "Daniel," she called. He turned. "I really did want freedom." Daniel smiled, small and unforced. "So did I." Then he walked toward his car without waiting for anyone to follow. Because the thing Claire never expected when she handed him an ending was that Daniel would finally use it as a beginning.